Hi everyone, today we're going to continue with Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. Now, to refresh your memory from our reading yesterday, we learned that Harry is a Parselmouth and he could speak to snakes, which is also what Salazar Slytherin is. So, people are thinking he might be the heir to Slytherin. And that is where we are going to pick up today. By the next morning, however, the snow that had begun in the night had turned into a blizzard so thick that the last herbology lesson of the term was canceled. Professor Sprout wanted to fit socks and scarves on the mandrakes, a tricky operation she would entrust to no one else, now that it was so important for the mandrakes to grow quickly to revive Mrs. Norris and Colin Creevey. Harry fretted about this next to the fire in the Gryffindor common room, while Ron and Hermione used their lesson off to play a game of wizard chess. "For heaven's sake, Harry," said Hermione, exasperated, as one of Ron's bishops wrestled her knight off of her horse and dragged him to the board. "Could go and find Justin if it's so important to you." So, Harry got up and left through the portrait hole, wondering where Justin might be. The castle was darker than it usually was in daytime, because of the thick, swirling gray snow at every window. Shivering, Harry walked past the classrooms where lessons were taking place, catching snatches of what were happening within. Professor McGonagall was shouting by someone who, by the sound of it, had turned his friends into a badger. Resisting the urge to take a look, Harry walked on by, thinking that Justin might be using his free lesson to catch up on some work and deciding to check the libraries first. A group of Hufflepuffs, who should have been in herbology, were indeed sitting at the back of the library, but they didn't seem to be working. Between the long lines of high bookshelves, Harry could see that their heads were close together and that they were having what looked like an absorbing conversation. He couldn't see whether Justin was among them. He was walking towards them, and something of what they were saying met his ears, and he paused, listened, hidden in the invisibility section. "So anyway," Stout Boy was saying, "I told Justin to hide up in our dormitory. I mean, to say if Potter marked him down as his next..." Look at this picture, guys. So awesome. What Hogwarts looked like on that snowy day. If Potter's marked him as the next victim, it's best if he keeps a low profile for a while. Of course, Justin's been waiting for something like this to happen ever since he let it slip to Potter that he was Muggle-born. Justin actually told him he'd been down for Eton. That's not the kind of thing you bandy about with a Slytherin heir on the loose, is it? "You definitely think it's Potter then, Ernie?" said a girl with blonde pigtails anxiously. "Hannah," said the Stout Boy solemnly, "he's a Parselmouth. Everyone knows that's the mark of a dark wizard. Have you heard of a decent one who could talk to snakes? They called Slytherin himself Serpentongue." There was some heavy murmuring, and Ernie went on, "Remember what was written on the wall? Enemies of the heir beware. Potter had some sort of run-in with Filch. Next thing we knew, Filch's catch was attacked. First year Creevey was annoying Potter at the Quidditch match, taking pictures of him while he was lying in the mud. Now, next thing we know, Creevey's been attacked." "He's always seemed so nice," said Hannah uncertainly. "And, well, he's the one who made you-know-who disappear. He can't be all bad, can he?" Ernie lowered his voice mysteriously. Hufflepuff's bending closer, and Harry edged nearer so he could catch Ernie's words. "No one knows why he survived that attack by you-know-who. I mean, to say he was only a baby when it happened. He should have been blasted into smithereens. Only a really powerful dark wizard could have survived a curse like that." He dropped his voice until it was barely more than a whisper and said, "That's probably why you-know-who didn't kill him in the first place. Didn't want another Dark Lord competing with him. I wonder what other powers Potter's been hiding." Harry couldn't take it anymore. Clearing his throat loudly, he stepped out of behind the bookshelves. If he hadn't been feeling so angry, he would have found the sight that greeted him funny. Even one of the Hufflepuffs looked as though it had been petrified by the sight of him. And the color was draining out of Ernie's face. "Hello," said Harry. "I'm looking for Justin Finch Fletchley." The Hufflepuff's worst fear had been confirmed. They all looked fearfully at Ernie. "What do you want with him?" said Ernie in a quavering voice. "I want to tell him what happened with the snake at the dueling club," said Harry. Ernie bit his white lips, taking a deep breath, said, "We were all there. We saw what happened." "Then you noticed that after I spoke to it, the snake backed off?" said Harry. "All I saw," said Ernie stubbornly, though he was trembling as he spoke, was you speaking Parseltongue and chasing the snake towards Justin. I didn't chase it at him, Harry said, his voice shaking with anger. It didn't even touch him. It was a very near miss, said Ernie. And in case you're getting ideas, he added hastily, I might tell you that we can trace my family back through the 9th generation of witches and warlocks, and my blood's as pure as anyone's, so I don't care what sort of blood you got, said Harry fiercely. Why would I want to attack Muggleborns? I heard you hate those Muggles you live with, said Ernie swiftly. It's not possible to live with the Dursleys and not hate them, said Harry. I'd like to see you try it. He turned on his heel and stormed out of the library, earning himself a reproving glare from Madame Pince, who was polishing and the glided cover of the large spell book. Harry blundered through the corridor, barely noticing what he was going and where he was going. He was in such a fury. The result was he walked into something very large and solid, which knocked him backward on the floor. Oh, hello, Hagrid, said Harry, looking up. Hagrid's face was entirely hidden by a woolly, snow-covered balaclava, and it was but it couldn't possibly anyone else. It filled most of the corridor, as he filled most of the corridor in his moleskin overcoat. A dead rooster was hanging from one of his massive gloved hands. All right, Harry, he said, pulling up the balaclava so he could speak. Why aren't you in class? Cancelled, said Harry, getting up. What are you doing in here? Hagrid held up a limp rooster. Second one killed this term, he explained. It's either foxes or a blood-sucking bugbear, and I need the headmaster's permission to put a charm around that hen coop. He peered more closely at Harry from under the thick, snow-flecked eyebrows. You sure you're all right? You look all hot and bothered. Harry couldn't bring himself to repeat what Ernie and the rest of the Hufflepuffs had been saying about him. It's nothing, he said. I'd better get going, Hagrid. It's Transfiguration next, and I've got to pick up my books. He was walking off, his mind still full of what Ernie had said about him. Justin's been waiting for something like this to happen. Ever since he let it slip to Potter, he was Muggle-born. Harry stamped up the stairs and turned along another corridor, which was particularly dark. The torches had been extinguished by a strong icy draught, which was blowing through the loose window pane. He was halfway down the passageway when he tripped headlong over something lying on the floor. He turned to squint at what had fallen, and he thought his stomach had just dissolved. Justin Finch Fletchley was standing on the floor, rigid and cold, a look of shock frozen on his face, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling, and that wasn't all. Next to him was another figure, the strangest sight Harry had ever seen. It was nearly Headless Nick. He was no longer pearly white and transparent, but black and smoky, floating immobile horizontal 6 inches off the floor. His head was half off, and his face bore an expression of shock identical to Justin's. Harry got to his feet, breathing fast and shallow. His heart was doing a kind of drum roll against his ribs. He looked wildly up and down the deserted corridor and saw a line of spiders scuttling as fast as they could away from the bodies. The only sounds were muffled voices of teachers from classes on the other side. He could run. No one would know he'd been there. But he couldn't just leave them there like this. He had to get them help. Would anyone believe he hadn't anything to do with this? He stood up, panicking. The door right next to him, and he opened it with a bang. Peeves the poltergeist came shouting out, Why, it's Potty Wee Potter! Cackled Peeves, knocking Harry's glasses askew as he bounced past him. What's Potter up to? Why is Potter lurking? Peeves stopped. Halfway through midair somersault, upside down, he spotted Justin and nearly Headless Nick. He flipped the right way up, filled his lungs before Harry could stop him, and screamed, Attack! Attack! Another attack! No mortal or ghost is safe! Run for your lives! Attack! Crash, crash, crash. Door after door flew open on the corridor, and people flooded out. For several long minutes, there was such a scene of confusion that Justin was in danger of being squashed, and people kept standing in nearly Headless Nick. Harry found himself pinned against the wall as the teacher shouted for quiet. Professor McGonagall came running, followed by her own class, one of whom had black and white striped hair. She used her wand to set off a loud bang, which restored silence and order and everyone back into their classes. No sooner than the scene cleared somewhat than Ernie, the Hufflepuff, arrived, panting on the scene. Caught in the act, Ernie yelled, his face stark white, pointing dramatically at Harry. That will do, McMillan, said Professor McGonagall sharply. Peeves was bobbing overhead, now grinning wickedly, surveying the scene. Peeves always loved chaos. And the teachers bent over at Justin and nearly headless Nick, examining them. Peeves broke up in song. Oh, Potter, you rotter! Oh, what have you done? You're killing us students. You think it's good fun? That's enough, Peeves, barked Professor McGonagall. Peeves zoomed backwards with his tongue out at Harry. Justin was carried up to the hospital wing by Professor Flitwick and Professor Sinstra of Astronomy Department, but nobody seemed to know what to do for nearly headless Nick. In the end, Professor McGonagall conjured up a large fan out of the air, which she gave to Ernie with the instructions to waft nearly headless Nick upstairs. This Ernie did, fanning Nick along silent like a black hovercraft. This left Professor and Harry and Professor McGonagall alone together. This way, Potter, she said. Professor, said Harry at once, I swear I didn't. This is out of my hands, Potter, Professor McGonagall said curtly. They marched into the silence around a corner, and she stopped before a large and extremely ugly stone gargoyle. Sherbet Lemon, she said, and this evidently a password because the gargoyle sprang suddenly to life and hopped aside, and the wall behind them split in two. Even full of dread for what was coming, Harry couldn't fail to be amazed. Behind the wall was a spiral staircase, which was moving smoothly upwards like an escalator. As he and Professor McGonagall stepped onto it, Harry heard the walls thud behind them. They rose upwards in circle, higher and higher, until at last, very dizzy, Harry could see a gleaming oak door ahead with a loud brass knocker in the shape of a griffin. He knew where he had been taken. This must be where Dumbledore lived. Chapter 12. The Polyjuice Potion. They stepped off the stone staircase at the top, and Professor McGonagall rapped on the door. It opened silently, and they entered. Professor McGonagall told Harry to wait and left him alone. Harry looked around. One thing was certain, of all the teachers' offices Harry had visited so far this year, Dumbledore's was far the most interesting. If he hadn't been scared out of his wits about to be thrown out of school, he would have been very pleased to have a chance to look around. It was a large and beautiful circular room full of funny little noises. A number of silver drum instruments stood spindle-legged tables whirling, emitting little puffs of smoke. The walls were covered with portraits of old headmasters and headmistresses, all of whom were snoozing gently in their frames. There was also an enormous claw-footed desk, and sitting on the shelf behind it was a shabby, tattered wizard's hat. The Sorting Hat. Harry hesitated. He caught a wary eye around the sleeping witches and wizards on the walls. Surely it couldn't hurt if he just took the hat down and tried it on again, just to make sure it had put him in the right house. He walked quietly around to the desk, lifted the hat from its shelf, and lowered it slowly onto his head. It was much too large, and it slipped down over his eyes, just as it had done the last time he put it on. Harry stared into the black inside of the hat, waiting. Then a small voice said in his ear, "Be in your bonnet, Harry Potter?" Yes, Harry muttered. Sorry to bother you. I wanted to ask. You've been wondering if I put you in the right house," said the hat smartly. "Yes, you were particularly difficult to place, but I stand by what I said before." Harry's heart leapt. You would have done well in Slytherin. Harry's stomach plummeted. He grabbed the point of the hat and pulled it off. He hung it limply on the hand, grubby and faded, and Harry pushed back onto the shelf, feeling sick. "You're wrong," he said aloud to the still and silent hat. It didn't move. Harry backed away, watching it. Then a strange gaggling noise behind him made him wheel around. He wasn't alone after all. Standing on the golden porch behind the door was a decrepit-looking bird, which resembled a half-plucked turkey. Harry stared at it, and the bird looked balefully back, making gagging noise again. Harry thought it looked very ill. Its eyes were dull, and even as Harry watched, a couple more feathers fell out of its tail. Harry was thinking that all he needed was for Dumbledore's pet bird to die while he was alone in the office, when the bird burst into flames. Harry yelled in shock, backed away into the desk. He looked feverishly around in case there were glasses of water somewhere, but he didn't see one. The bird, meanwhile, became a fireball. It gave off one loud shriek, and the second, and nothing but a smoldering pile of ash on the floor. The office door opened. Dumbledore came in, looking very somber. "Professor," Harry gasped, "your bird, I couldn't do anything. He just caught fire." To Harry's astonishment, Dumbledore smiled. "Ah, about time, too," he said. "He's been looking dreadful for days. I've been telling him to move on." He chuckled at the stunned look on Harry's face. "Fawkes is a phoenix, Harry. Phoenixes burst into flames when it comes time for them to die, and they were reborn from the ashes. Watch him." Harry looked down in time to see a tiny, wrinkled, newborn bird poke its head out of the ashes. It was quite as ugly as the old one. "It's a shame you had to see him on burning day," said Dumbledore, seating himself behind the desk. "He's really very handsome most of the time. Wonderful red, gold plumage. Fascinating creatures, phoenixes. They carry immensely heavy loads, and their tears have healing powers, and they are very faithful pets." In shock of Fawkes catching fire, Harry had forgotten what he was there for. But it all came back to him as Dumbledore settled himself in the high-backed chair behind the desk and fixed Harry with his penetrating light blue stare. Before Dumbledore could speak, however, the door of the office flew open with an almighty bang, and Hagrid burst in with a wild look on his face. His balaclava perched on top of his shaggy black beard, and his dead rooster swinging around. "It wasn't Harry, Professor Dumbledore," said Hagrid urgently. "I was talking to him seconds before the kid was found. He never had the time, sir." Dumbledore tried to say something, but Hagrid went ranting on, waving the rooster in his agitation, sending feathers everywhere. "It can't been him, I swear it in front of the Ministry of Magic if I have to." "Hagrid, you've got the wrong boy, sir. I know Harry never—" "Hagrid," said Dumbledore loudly, "I do not think that Harry attacked these people." "Oh," said Hagrid, the rooster falling limply at its side. "Right. I'll just wait outside, Headmaster." He stomped out, looking embarrassed. "You don't think it was me, Professor?" Harry repeated hopefully, as Dumbledore brushed rooster feathers off of his desk. "No, Harry, I don't," said Dumbledore, though his face was somber again. "But I still want to talk to you." Harry waited nervously while Dumbledore considered him, the tips of how long his fingers together. "I must ask you, Harry, where there is something you would like to tell me," he said gently. "Anything at all." He didn't know what to say. He thought of Malfoy shouting, "You'll be next, Mudbloods," and the Polyjuice potion simmering away in Moaning Myrtle's bathroom. He thought of this assembled voice he heard twice, and he remembered Ron saying, "Hearing voices is no good sign, even in the wizarding world." He thought, too, about what everyone was saying about him, and the growing dread that he was somehow connected to Salazar Slytherin. "No," Harry said, "there's nothing, Professor." The double attack of Justin and Nearly Headless Nook turned out to send everyone into a real panic. Curiously, it was Nearly Headless Nick's fate that seemed to worry people the most. What could possibly do that to a ghost, people asked each other. What terrible power could harm someone who is already dead? There was almost a stampede of book seats on the Hogwarts Express so that the students could go home for Christmas. "At this rate, we'll be the only ones left," Ron told Harry and Hermione. "Us, Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle. What a jolly holiday it's going to be." Crabbe and Goyle, who always did whatever Malfoy did, had signed up to stay over the holidays too, but Harry was glad that most people were leaving. He was tired of people scooting around him in the corridors as though he was about to sprout fangs or spit poisons, tired of the muttering and pointing and hissing as he passed. Fred and George, however, found it all very funny. They went out of their way to march out for Harry up the corridor, shouting, "Make way for the heir of Slytherin, seriously evil wizard coming through." Percy was deeply approving of this behavior. "It is not a laughing matter," he said coldly. "Oh, get out of the way, Percy," said Fred. "Harry's in a hurry." "Yeah, he's nipping off to the Chamber of Secrets for a cup of tea with his fanged servant," said George, tortily. Ginny didn't find it amusing either. "Oh, don't," she wailed every time Fred asked Harry how loudly he was planning to attack next, or George pretended to ward Harry off with a large clove of garlic when they met. Harry didn't mind. It made him feel better that Fred and George, at least, thought the idea of him being Slytherin's heir was quite ridiculous. But their antics seemed to be aggravating Draco Malfoy, who looked increasingly sour each time they saw him do it. It's because he's bursting to say it's really him, said Ron knowingly. You know how he hates anyone beating him at anything, and you're getting all the credit for his dirty work. Not for long, Hermione said in a satisfied tone. The polyjuice potion's nearly ready. We'll be getting the truth out of him any day now. And that is where we are going to stop today. So, 2 more people petrified at Hogwarts. I want you guys to think. Who's doing this? Why are they doing this? Who is the heir to Slytherin? All right, guys, I hope you have an awesome day, and I'll talk to you all soon. Bye-bye.